So Boris Johnson is facing Tory rebellion after the government's unfair new tier system placed 99% of England's population into the highest tiers.
Unfair, of course, is what some people think it is. The Prime Minister claims they were necessary to prevent a New Year national lockdown after it was revealed just Cornwall, the Isle of Wight and the Isles of Scilly are placed into the lowest tier, Tier 1. Well, we're joined now by Housing Secretary Robert Jenrick. Look, there's no doubt, is there, that you have an impossible calculation to make, looking at keeping people safe, keeping the economy going and making decisions based on people's behaviour. It seems, though, if you read the papers this morning and from the comments that we're getting into on the show, that you've done the extraordinary thing of frustrating everyone, including many of your own MPs, by what appears to be very unfair, high-level restrictions when people have followed lockdown.
Well, good morning. I know it's very difficult, but we wanted to design the tiers in such a way that we were confident that they would actually work and do the job. And the tiers that we had before the November national measures, we learned were probably not strong enough. So Tier 1 didn't have much of an impact. Tier 2 had some impact. It helped to slow the rate of infection from rising, but it didn't really help to decisively turn it downwards. And Tier 3 was working in some parts of the country, you saw in Liverpool, for example, but not everywhere. And we wanted to make sure that Tier 3, again, would not just slow the rise, but actually would start to bring it down. And so the new tiers that we've designed, with the help of our scientific advisors, are ones which we think are strong enough, if everybody does their bit and abides by the rules, to ensure that we don't need to have another national lockdown and that we can help to steer the country through the last few months before the vaccine is being rolled out and the more vulnerable people in society have been vaccinated, and we get towards March and April when we think that life as we used to know it can start to return. That's the important thing.
The problem is how people are perceiving the continuing messages, isn't it? There's no doubt that what the government was trying to say to us as we went into lockdown is say, this is regrettable, but it's necessary. If we do things, we can get things under control. So you might say that you've now reviewed it and we needed stronger tiers, but people went in thinking, knuckle down and get through this and things will get better. And you've got parts in Kent that were in Tier 1, suffered lockdown, come out Tier 3, even worse off. And that's what they're asking us. How could we be worse off post-lockdown than before it? People don't get it and are getting tired of having to knuckle down and things just get worse.
I completely understand that. It's frustrating and difficult for all of us. My own constituency in Nottinghamshire is in Tier 3. So I do understand and empathise, but we do need to make sure the tiers are strong and robust and do the job,
Why didn't
as
you
I
say that before lockdown then? You know, so that people would be able to measure it. The message wasn't there.
The evidence suggested that the tiers that we were having before the national measures in November weren't quite strong enough. And so that meant that we were constantly playing catch-up. Places were going up the tiers. What we want to do is have a tiered system, which means that if everything goes well, places should be coming down the tiers, not going up them. And there will be a review point on the 16th of December, which is going to be a meaningful review point at which many places may be able to come down. And there were quite a few parts of the country which were very finely balanced.
Yeah, Robert Jenrick, will those reviews, will they be more district-based rather than county-based? Lots of people getting in touch about Kent this morning. We've discussed that. Jane talking about Lancashire this morning. The fact that there are only small parts of Lancashire have a high R rate, yet the whole county is in Tier 3. Carol talking about Lincolnshire. When they went into lockdown, they were in Tier 1. They are now in Tier 3. Certain parts of Lincolnshire have higher areas, but the majority of it isn't as bad. Will that be more regionally based? Because one of the issues that everybody has is because the government won't publish the process, the reasons behind each of these regions going into various tiers, people are getting fed up. And if people are fed up, they don't trust the rules. And if people don't trust the rules, they don't abide by the rules. So the tier system, which you're saying is now more robust, actually has less impact.
Well, we have published the reasons behind the tiers. We've published
the data,
both the
not the, sorry, apologies. The data, the specific data why certain areas have gone into various tiers, not the reasons behind the general tier system, but the actual data.
Well, we've published both. We've published the 5 tests that we're using, and we've published the reasons why different places have fallen into the tiers that they've been allocated to. The point that you make about the sort of unit of geography that we're using is an important one, and we have considered that at length. Each local authority area will be considered on its own merits at each of the review points, but you also have to take into account whether or not that is the sensible thing to do, because the virus doesn't respect the boundaries of your local district council or indeed even your county. It spreads easily and freely, and people can move around to go to hospital, to go to school, to go to work. And so we do have to think about sensible geographies that respect the way in which we all lead our lives.
They don't respect county lines either. That would be an argument for a national lockdown to continue. And the people that are doubting the data that you've published and why it's been done are some of your own MPs. Richard Drax says, why with only 80 cases for every 100,000 people in South Dorset are we in Tier 2? Tobias Elwood says, I cannot believe it. Only 160 cases per 100,000 in Bournemouth. Why is that considered when, if you look at other people in Tier 2 and in Tier 3, it's very different. There's a very different spread of cases.
Well, we have tried to use the same framework for assessing each part of the country. It isn't just about the rate of infection that you quote there. It's also about, is it rising, is it falling? What's the rate of infection amongst the over 60s, the people who are most likely to be unwell? What's going on in local hospitals? And looking at those 5 tests together, we take a balanced judgment as to where an area should be. I appreciate it can be frustrating if you're in a town or village where there hasn't been many cases, but you're near to others where there is a higher rate of infection. But when we've tried in the past to hive out quite small places, that often hasn't worked. It's sometimes proved counterproductive, and actually the rate of infection has then just risen rapidly in that place. I saw that where I represent earlier in the year, where the city of Nottingham had a very high rate of infection, and we tried to do something differently for the city versus the county. In fact, very rapidly, the number of cases rose up in the county to higher rates than they were in the city. So you do have to take balanced judgments and try, where possible, to keep sensible areas together. So to keep the whole of London together, or to keep the whole of Lincolnshire together.
There are arguments that certain boroughs in London are very, very high, but other boroughs are very, very low. So that's an argument that Sadiq Khan, I'm sure, would be very keen to have with whoever had set up the tier system. But the point that Kate makes about the point that Kate makes,
if I may, Sadiq Khan was actually keen to keep the whole of London together, as were we, because people go shopping, they go to work across the whole of London, regardless of which borough they actually live in.
I think what undoubtedly you will have seen, if you've been into Westminster, there is nobody going through London at the moment. London, and the city particularly, is a ghost town because everybody is working from home. So there is real problems when we consider how important the economy in London is for the whole of the country. But what I wanted to talk about was the rebellion that you're facing. Those MPs that Kate already mentioned, they are just 2 or 3 of a huge number, a swelling number, who say they won't vote with this policy when it goes in next week for the government. Is there concerns that it won't go through? And if this doesn't go through, then what happens to the whole tier system?
Well, we've committed to the parliamentary process. It's important that MPs have their say on this, so it will be debated and voted on. That will be the way in which this decision is made. But I hope we can persuade our parliamentary colleagues that this is the right thing to do, that these tiers will be sufficiently robust and that they will help us to get through the next few months. I think what has changed, and this is really important since the last time this was debated in Parliament and voted on, is of course the advent of the vaccines. And so now we can all see that there is light at the end of the tunnel, that there is an exit strategy for the country, and that potentially by the end of this year, some of the most vulnerable people in society will be being vaccinated, and certainly rapidly into the new year. So that does mean that there's a strong argument for us all having this tiered system in place, abiding by the rules for just a few more months to help to steer the country towards those sort of better times that we can expect next year.
Because there's all sorts of questions about the vaccine that we probably haven't got time to go into now, but let's hope you're right, and that's a good message, and I'm sure I understand why you would say it. Look, You're trying to deliver balanced judgments based partly on doing what you feel is right and also on the science, even though you always quote the scientists. One of the scientists, the government having made a decision that households could meet for 5 days over Christmas, more than one household, 3 households could meet. Chris Whitty suddenly says, well, I wouldn't hug an elderly relative and there's a risk of it. Would you hug your elderly relative personally? And more than that, it's not just about hugging, isn't it? In most people's homes, you're crammed on the sofa to get 3 households together. You're grabbing chairs from the bedroom to get round the table. That's the reality of 3 households coming together in most people's normal homes. So it's not just about hugging, is it? It's about actual distance and the risk you're taking at all.
I think that's right. Well, we all have very similar Christmas experiences, don't we, as you say, opening presents, sitting on the sofa, watching TV together. I'm very pleased that we've been able to agree across the whole of the United Kingdom a legal framework which says that you can come together with family and friends in a limited way for a certain number of days. But that doesn't mean that you have to do that. It will be a personal judgment. And I think families, the length and breadth of the country in the next few weeks, will be thinking about what do we actually want to do. And you'll have to take into account your own circumstances.
Are you going to hug your elderly relatives? I don't know, your ages of your...
I'm having those conversations with my mum and dad. They're both older people. They've been shielding at different times. I've got young kids who will find it difficult to socially distance when they would love to hug and kiss their grandparents. So we're having those conversations, deciding what is the right way to celebrate Christmas.
You're not sure either then, because that's the confusing thing for all of us.
Well, we're going to be having a conversation coming to our own conclusion. It might be that, unfortunately, we choose to do things quite differently this Christmas to the ones we've had in the past, because we don't want to put anyone at risk when we're so close to them being vaccinated. But those are personal choices that different families, will come to different conclusions on. But if you do want to come together and have something more akin to a normal Christmas, then you are able to, because we've allowed 2 or 3 households to come together just for those few days.
We're going to have to leave it there, I'm afraid. Robert Jenrick, thanks for joining us this morning.
Thank you.